shivering on an abandoned road. Everyone in the small town knew about this road. It had been abandoned for decades, overgrown with weeds and old trees whose branches hung menacingly over the asphalt. The locals whispered about it as the road of no return. They said that anyone who drove on it after midnight never returned. But Mike and Jessica, a young college couple, thought all this was silly urban legends. They were determined to prove otherwise. "Are you scared?" Mike smiled, starting the old pickup. "Of course not," Jessica challenged, sitting down next to him. "Come on, let's show these country bumpkins that we are not cowards." For the first few minutes, the drive along the abandoned road seemed normal. Moonlight filtered through the rare gaps in the dense crowns of the trees, and the wind gently rustled the grass along the shoulders. "See, it's okay," Jessica said, but her voice betrayed her. Mike laughed, but his laughter died when they noticed it. There was a girl standing in the middle of the road. She was about 10 years old, her pale skin almost glowing in the moonlight. She was wearing an old-fashioned dress, faded and torn. Her eyes, they were black as an abyss. "Oh my God, can you see that?" Jessica breathed. Mike braked sharply, but the girl didn't move. She just stood there, looking straight at them. "Are you okay?" he shouted through the lowered window. The girl slowly raised her hand, pointing down the road. "Is she asking us to keep going?" Jessica squeezed Mike's hand. "Maybe she needs help." But when Mike got out of the car to go to her, the girl was gone. Gone, as if she'd never been there. "This is weird," he muttered, getting back in. They continued driving, but now something was different. The temperature in the car dropped sharply, and the radio began to make static, even though it was off. "Mike, turn around!" Jessica's voice was tense. "We're almost there." Mike gripped the steering wheel, looking ahead. And then the road ended. The truck stopped in front of an old, rusty metal bridge. On the other side, pitch blackness awaited him. "This is definitely not on the map," Jessica whispered. There was a sign in front of the bridge that read, "No turning back." They didn't have time to discuss what to do next. From the darkness came a creaking sound, as if someone was walking across the bridge, dragging something heavy behind them. "Start it!" Jessica screamed, but the car didn't start. Mike was desperately turning the key in the ignition when figures began to emerge from the darkness. Their faces were distorted as if they were victims of an accident. One look at their empty eye sockets was enough to make Jessica's heart sink into her heels. "Mike, hurry!" The car started at the last moment. Mike turned sharply and they pulled back, but the road began to change. The trees seemed to move, closing in on the truck, and shadows reached out from the fog, trying to grab the car. When they finally pulled out onto the familiar highway, both were pale as a sheet. "No more roads of no return," Jessica whispered, shaking. But when they turned their heads back to make sure no one was following them, they saw her. The girl was standing on the side of the road, pointing at them with her thin hand. And then the truck stalled. Mike turned the ignition key furiously, but the engine was silent. The night was thickening, as if the darkness itself was squeezing them in its paws. The girl was still standing on the side of the road, motionless, like a marble statue. Only her black eyes, like bottomless pits, followed their every move. She's coming here," Jessica was gasping, her voice breaking with panic. The girl began to move, slowly, but with each second, the steps became faster. "Shit!" Mike screamed, hitting the steering wheel. Suddenly the silence was broken by the sound of an impact. Something slammed against the roof of the pickup, heavy, slippery. They both froze, afraid to move. "What is it?" Jessica whispered, squeezing Mike's hand until her knuckles turned white. But the answer did not match. Instead, The roof of the car began to sag, as if under the test of honest weight. From inside, there was a metallic sound about preserving deep beards. "I need to introduce myself," Jessica cried out, but Mike grabbed her arm. "Are you crazy? There's that girl!" As if in response to his words, the driver's door glass suddenly burst. Bony fingers covered in grey leather appeared from outside, groping for the lock. "We won't succeed," Mike whispered, and suddenly the engine came to life on its own. The truck roared as if it was running on its last legs, and the car jerked forward. The steering wheel moved without Mike's participation, as if someone had quietly taken control. "What's going on?" Jessica covered her face with her hands, screaming in horror. The car was racing along a road that didn't exist. The trees disappeared, and in their place there was a black void. Only the dim light of the headlights picked out the non-existent highway ahead. "This isn't a real road," Mike said, realizing the horror of what was happening. A screech was heard from behind. They turned around and opened up as figures rushed towards them from the darkness. The same distorted faces they had seen before. They were no longer walking. They were running, stretching out their clawed hands towards the truck. And suddenly their voices broke through into the cabin. "Stay with us. Stay here." Mike struggled to regain control of the car, but it was no use. Suddenly, he noticed something ahead. It was a sign. "Make a choice." Beneath it stood an old payphone. It looked alien, torn from time. "This is our chance," Jessica shouted, opening the door as she ran. She jumped out, falling onto the hard but cold ground. Mike grabbed her, and noticing her disappearance into the darkness, leaving them alone with the ancient source. They struggled to their feet and went to the phone. Jessica, her hands shaking, picked up the receiver. "What should we do?" She whispered into the receiver, but only a buzzing sound came in response, and then a voice rang out, cold and low. "You're calling too late." A thick fog began to thicken around them. The voice continued, "One of you must die. This is the only way the other one needs to leave. Dot." They looked at each other, a coldness gripping their hearts. "No, it's impossible," Jessica whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Jess, you have to go," Mike said quietly, lowering his head. "No, we'll get out together." But the fog was thickening. Shadows were appearing. One of them reached out a clawed hand and grabbed Mike by the shoulder. "Go away before it's too late," he shouted, pushing Jessica toward the road that had reappeared behind her. She screamed, resisted, but the shadows dragged Mike into the darkness. The last thing she heard was his cry, "Run!" Jessica ran without looking back. The trees flashed behind her again. The road became familiar. She broke out onto the highway, illuminated by the lights of other cars. But when she stopped and saw that the shadows had disappeared, she did something that made her blood run cold. On the rear window of a car parked on the side of the road were the words, "We will find you."